The massive alien vessel hung in the dark expanse of space, its crystalline surface reflecting the distant starlight like a diamond suspended in void. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the helm of the U.S. Intrepid, Earth's most advanced battleship, watching as the alien diplomatic fleet approached, her hands clasped behind her back, concealing the slight tremor of anticipation that ran through them. This was humanity's first official contact with the Galactic Council, and everything had to go perfectly. "They're hailing us, Commander," Lieutenant David Parker reported from his communications station, his voice steady despite the historic moment unfolding before them. The bridge crew held their breath, years of training keeping them professional even as their hearts raced with excitement. The alien transmission came through in perfect English, thanks to their advanced translation technology. "Greetings, Earth vessel. We are the representatives of the Galactic Council. We request permission to dock and begin diplomatic proceedings." The voice was melodious but carried an unmistakable note of superiority that made Sarah's jaw tighten slightly. "Permission granted," she responded, maintaining the composed demeanor that had earned her this command. "We welcome you aboard the U.S. Intrepid." As she spoke, she couldn't help but smile inwardly at what was about to unfold. The aliens had no idea what they were about to witness. The docking procedure went smoothly, and Sarah led her honor guard to the airlock to greet their visitors. The doors hissed open to reveal three tall, ethereal beings with iridescent skin and flowing robes that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Their expressions, though alien, clearly showed their assumption of technological superiority. "We are pleased to welcome humanity into the galactic community," the lead alien spoke, its translator converting its musical tones into words. "We understand this is your most advanced vessel. We look forward to discussing how we might help you improve upon it." Sarah kept her diplomatic smile firmly in place, even as she noticed the slight condescension in their tone. "We would be honored to give you a tour of our ship," she replied, gesturing for them to follow. The aliens glided forward with grace that seemed almost supernatural, their movements completely silent. The tour began with the standard areas: the mess hall, the recreation deck, the medical bay. With each stop, she could sense the aliens' growing confusion. The Intrepid wasn't the primitive vessel they had expected. Its technology was different from theirs, yes, but not inferior. The medical equipment particularly caught their attention, as did the quantum computing systems. But it was when they reached the main engineering section that everything changed. The massive fusion reactor hummed with power, its containment field glowing with a subtle blue light. The alien delegates froze, their large eyes widening in what Sarah now recognized as shock. "This is impossible," the lead alien whispered, its translator struggling to convey the depth of its disbelief. "Your species only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. You cannot have already mastered contained fusion on this scale." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Actually, we've had fusion power for over 30 years. This is our latest generation reactor, capable of powering not just the ship's systems, but also our main weapon arrays and defensive shields." The aliens exchanged glances, their earlier superiority evaporating like morning dew. One of them stepped forward, its movements now less graceful and more urgent. "Your weapons, they are powered by this. Would you like to see our combat systems next?" Sarah offered, knowing full well what effect it would have. The aliens had come expecting to find a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. Instead, they were discovering that humanity had taken a very different path to the stars, one that had produced results they hadn't thought possible. As they made their way toward the weapons control center, Sarah could hear them whispering among themselves in their native language, their translators turned off. She didn't need to understand their words to know what they were discussing. Humanity had just announced its presence on the galactic stage in a way they would never forget, and this was only the beginning. The Weapon Control Center of the USS Intrepid was a marvel of human engineering, its holographic displays casting a soft blue glow across the faces of both crew and visitors. Sarah noticed how the aliens' movements had become more hesitant, their earlier confidence replaced by something that looked remarkably like concern. The lead alien, who had introduced itself as High Counselor Vex, kept glancing at the tactical displays with what she could only interpret as growing alarm. "This is our main fire control system," Lieutenant Parker explained, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "The Intrepid carries a complement of advanced railguns, plasma torpedoes, and our newest development, quantum cascade missiles." He spoke with pride, but without bragging. This was simply stating facts. Quantum cascade. One of the other aliens, a science officer named Zinn, stepped forward. "You've managed to weaponize quantum field manipulation." The translator couldn't quite capture the tremor in its voice, but Sarah heard it in the original alien speech. "Among other things," Sarah replied casually. "Would you like to see the test footage from our last combat exercises?" She nodded to Parker, who brought up a holographic replay of the Intrepid's recent war games. The aliens watched in silence as the massive battleship executed maneuvers that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size, its weapon systems firing with devastating precision. High Counselor Vex's iridescent skin had taken on a paler hue. "We were led to believe that humanity was still developing basic space combat capabilities. Our reports indicated that your species was at least a century away from achieving this level of military technology." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inwardly she smiled. Those reports had been exactly what Earth's intelligence services had wanted the Galactic Council to believe. "Perhaps your information was outdated," she suggested diplomatically. "Humanity has always been quite innovative when it comes to developing new technologies." The third alien, whose name and role hadn't been shared, finally spoke up. "These innovations, they are not following the standard progression of technological development. All other species we have encountered followed a similar path. But this," it gestured at the surrounding technology, "this is something entirely different." "Humans have always been good at thinking outside the box," Sarah replied, using the old Earth phrase deliberately. "We found our own way to the stars, and our own ways to survive among them." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing the tour. As they moved through the ship's corridors, Sarah could sense the growing tension in their visitors. The aliens were finally beginning to understand what they were actually seeing, not just advanced technology, but a completely different approach to space warfare than anything they had encountered before. They reached the ship's armor testing facility, where Chief Engineer Rodriguez was conducting routine materials stress tests. The massive piece of composite armor was being subjected to forces that would have torn apart most metals, yet it barely showed a scratch. "This is impossible," Zinn muttered, its translator barely catching the words. "The energy readings, the structural integrity, it defies all known principles of materials science." Rodriguez looked up from his work, his weathered face breaking into a proud grin. "Not impossible, just different. We had to get creative when we realized our traditional materials wouldn't hold up in deep space combat. This is a hybrid technology, part traditional metallurgy, part quantum field manipulation, and a few other tricks we picked up along the way." The aliens huddled together, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. Sarah caught fragments of their conversation through their partially active translators. Phrases like complete reassessment and military implications kept coming up. Good, she thought. That was exactly the reaction Earth's leadership had hoped for. The diplomatic mission was taking a turn none of the aliens had anticipated. They had come to evaluate what they thought was an emerging spacefaring race, one that would need guidance and protection to join the galactic community. Instead, they were discovering that humanity had not only mastered technologies they thought impossible, but had developed them in ways the Galactic Council had never imagined. Sarah led them toward their final destination, the bridge's tactical center. As they walked, she noticed High Counselor Vex typing something into a small device, presumably sending an urgent message back to the Council. The other aliens were no longer gliding gracefully. Their movements had become almost jerky with nervous energy. "Before we reach the tactical center," Sarah said, stopping in the corridor, "there's something you should know." She turned to face their visitors, her expression serious. "What you've seen so far is impressive, I'm sure, but it's only a fraction of what humanity has achieved. We've kept much of our development quiet for a reason. The question is," she paused, letting the tension build, "are you ready to learn why?" The aliens exchanged glances, their earlier superiority completely gone. They were beginning to realize that this wasn't just a diplomatic mission anymore. It was a revelation that would shake the foundations of the Galactic Council's understanding of emerging species. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, other human ships just like the Intrepid were waiting, ready to show the galaxy that humanity had arrived on its own terms. The tactical center's massive doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a chamber that made the aliens freeze in their tracks. The room was a testament to human military advancement, with three-dimensional star maps floating in the air and real-time battle simulations playing out on multiple holographic displays. But what caught their attention wasn't the technology. It was the map showing the positions of human ships throughout known space. As you can see, Sarah gestured to the glowing dots scattered across the star chart. The Intrepid isn't alone. We have vessels stationed throughout this sector of the galaxy, most of them similar to or more advanced than this ship. She watched as the aliens processed this information, their translucent skin shifting colors in what she had learned to recognize as extreme distress. High Counselor Vex stepped forward, its movements now completely lacking their earlier fluid grace. These ships, they've been there all along. Even when the alien stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing it had said too much. Even when you were testing our borders, Sarah finished the thought. Yes, they were there, watching, waiting. We saw every probe you sent, tracked every scout ship. She moved to one of the displays and brought up a series of recordings, including the ones you thought were undetectable. The science officer, Zin, made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret. But our cloaking technology, it's supposed to be perfect. No emerging species should be able to detect it. Perhaps, Lieutenant Parker spoke up from his station. You should reconsider your definition of an emerging species. He pulled up another display showing detailed scans of the aliens' own ships. We've been studying your technology since your first scout ship entered our solar system 15 years ago. Fascinating designs, but a bit predictable. The third alien, who had remained silent for most of the tour, suddenly stepped forward. The Council must be informed immediately. This changes everything about our assessment of human capabilities. Its fingers moved toward the communication device at its belt. I'm afraid communications are temporarily blocked, Sarah said calmly. Standard security protocol during tactical briefings. Don't worry, we'll restore your ability to contact your fleet soon enough. But first, there's something else you need to see. She nodded to Parker, who activated the main tactical display. A simulation began playing, showing a massive battle between two space fleets. One side was clearly using Galactic Council ship designs. The other was something entirely different. 3 months ago, we detected a signal from the edge of known space, Sarah explained as the simulation played out. Something is coming. Something that your council's standard protocols and technologies won't be able to handle. That's why we revealed ourselves now. That's why we let your diplomatic mission find us. The simulation showed the council ships being systematically destroyed by an unknown force using weapons and tactics that seemed to defy the laws of physics themselves. The aliens watched in horror as their most powerful ship designs were torn apart like paper. This isn't a simulation, is it? High Counselor Vex asked, its voice barely a whisper. This is a prediction, based on actual data. Sarah shook her head grimly. Not a prediction. It's historical footage from a small encounter 2 weeks ago at the edge of your territory. Your ships never saw what hit them. But we did, and we know what's coming next. The aliens huddled together, their earlier diplomatic facades completely shattered. They were no longer representatives of a superior civilization coming to guide a younger species. They were witnesses to something that shook their understanding of the galaxy to its core. Why show us this? Zin asked, its translator struggling to convey the complex emotions in its voice. Why reveal your true capabilities now? Sarah walked to the main viewport, staring out at the stars for a moment before turning back to their visitors. Because what's coming isn't just a threat to humanity or the Galactic Council. It's something older, something that's been waiting in the dark spaces between galaxies. And the only way any of us are going to survive is if we stop playing diplomatic games and start preparing for war. She moved to another console and entered a command. The tactical display shifted, showing something that made even her seasoned crew members catch their breath. What you're about to see is classified beyond any level your council has. It's the real reason humanity developed its technology the way we did. It's why we had to be ready. And after you see it, you'll understand why we've been watching, waiting, and preparing for this moment. The display flickered, and as the image began to form, the aliens' translators couldn't even begin to capture the sounds of shock and horror that escaped them. What they were seeing would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever, if there was still a galaxy left to govern after what was coming. The tactical display showed something that defied description. A massive void in space, darker than the darkness between stars, moving with deliberate purpose. Around it, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. The footage, captured by one of humanity's deep space probes, showed the void consuming everything in its path: asteroids, planets, even light itself. "We first detected it 30 years ago," Sarah explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "This is why humanity developed our technology so differently from other species. We couldn't afford to follow the normal path of technological evolution. We needed weapons that could fight something that doesn't entirely exist in our dimension." High Counselor Vex's translator crackled with static as it spoke. The ancient darkness. It was supposed to be a myth. A story told to young ones about the early days of the galaxy. The alien's skin had turned almost transparent with fear. "Our oldest records speak of it, but we thought—" "Your records were right," Lieutenant Parker interrupted, bringing up another display. "But they're incomplete. We found evidence in ruins on Mars, left there by a civilization that existed millions of years before either of our species. They fought this thing before. They lost." He paused, letting that sink in. "But they left us a warning, and more importantly, they left us blueprints." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. Warning lights flashed red, and the tactical displays erupted with new data. Sarah rushed to the main console, her face illuminated by the emergency lights. Status report. "Massive spatial distortion detected at the edge of the system," Parker reported, his fingers flying over the controls. "It's bigger than anything we've seen before, and it's not alone." The main screen shifted to show real-time footage from the system's outer defense platforms. The void they'd seen in the recording was there, but now it was accompanied by something else: massive ships of an unknown design, emerging from the darkness like ancient sea monsters surfacing from the depths. By the first light, Zinn whispered, the translator barely catching the words, "Those are precursor vessels, the ships of those who came before even our oldest civilizations. They're supposed to be dead. Their entire civilization vanished eons ago." Sarah's expression hardened. They didn't vanish. They were taken, corrupted, and now they're being used as the vanguard for something far worse. She turned to the aliens, her voice carrying the weight of command. "This is why we reveal ourselves today, not to show off our technology or prove our worth to your council. We needed you to understand what humanity has been preparing for all along." The third alien, who had been silent, suddenly stepped forward. "The council, they need to know, but they'll never believe us without proof." Its voice carried an unexpected note of steel. "Even with these readings, they'll hesitate, debate, follow protocols that were never designed for this kind of threat." "That's exactly what we're counting on," Sarah replied, a grim smile playing across her face. She pressed a sequence of commands into her console, and new data flooded the tactical displays. "While we've been talking, 20 other human ships just like the Intrepid have been moving into position throughout Council space, each one carrying technology specifically designed to fight both the Void and its corrupted precursor ships." The aliens watched in stunned silence as the tactical display showed hundreds of human vessels decloaking near critical Council worlds and installations. It was an invasion force large enough to conquer the entire Council space, but it wasn't aimed at the Council. "We're not asking for the Council's permission," Sarah stated firmly. "We're not here to negotiate. We're here to save every sentient species in this galaxy, whether they want us to or not. The only question is," she fixed the aliens with an intense stare, "are you going to help us, or are we going to have to save you from yourselves first?" Before any of the aliens could respond, another alarm screamed through the ship. Parker's face went pale as he read the incoming data. "Commander, the void ships. They're not just attacking random targets. They're moving in a pattern, and based on their trajectory." He looked up, his eyes wide with realization. They're heading straight for Earth. Sarah's jaw tightened as she processed this new information. The whole situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The Void wasn't just launching an attack. It was directly challenging humanity's gambit. And as she looked at the tactical display showing the massive fleet of corrupted precursor ships bearing down on her homeworld, she realized that all of humanity's careful plans and preparations might not be enough. Sarah's hands flew across the tactical console, initiating a sequence of commands that set the entire ship humming with power. "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill." Her voice echoed through the ship's comm system, steady and determined. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, the product of years of preparation for exactly this moment. "The Void ships will reach Earth in 48 hours, Parker reported, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Our fleet is moving to intercept, but the corrupted precursor vessels are using some kind of spatial distortion technology. Traditional weapons might not be enough." High Counselor Vex stepped forward, all pretense of diplomatic superiority forgotten. "The Council fleet, they're not prepared for this. None of us are, but perhaps—" The alien's skin rippled with changing colors as it made a decision. "Perhaps we can offer something that might help." Sarah turned, her eyebrow raised questioningly. Vex reached into its robes and withdrew a small crystalline device. "This contains the access codes to every Council defense platform and automated weapons system in this sector. We never shared this technology with emerging species, but—" The alien paused, looking at the approaching Void ships on the display. "But perhaps it's time we admitted that humanity has surpassed us in ways we never imagined." Without warning, the tactical display flashed with new alerts. The Void ships had launched their first attack, targeting a small Council outpost. The footage showed something that made even the seasoned crew members gasp. The stations weren't just being destroyed, they were being absorbed, their matter and energy feeding the darkness that consumed them. "Now," Sarah commanded, and Lieutenant Parker activated a sequence they had hoped they wouldn't need to use so soon. Throughout Council space, the hidden human fleet sprang into action, but they weren't attacking. Instead, each ship activated a device that sent ripples of golden energy through space itself. "The Quantum Anchor Network," Sarah explained to their stunned alien guests. "Those ruins on Mars didn't just warn us about the Void. They showed us how to fight it. The ancient civilization failed because they tried to battle the darkness in normal space. We learned from their mistake." The tactical display showed the effects of the quantum anchors. Wherever their energy touched the Void ships, reality itself seemed to solidify, preventing the creatures from slipping between dimensions. The corrupted precursor vessels found themselves forced to fight in normal space, where humanity's weapons could affect them. But the Void wasn't finished. As they watched, the darkness between the enemy ships began to spiral and concentrate, forming into something that defied description. "By all that exists," Zen whispered, "it's trying to merge the corrupted ships into a single entity." Sarah smiled grimly. "That's exactly what we wanted them to do." She pressed a final sequence of commands, and new ships appeared on the tactical display. Massive vessels unlike anything the aliens had seen before, emerging from hyperspace at precise coordinates around the forming Void entity. "The Lightbringer-class vessels," Sarah announced. "Humanity's true masterpiece. We reversed the Void's own technology. Instead of consuming energy and matter, these ships can channel the fundamental forces of the universe itself." She turned to the aliens. "That's why we needed your defense platform codes. Not to control them, but to synchronize them with what's about to happen." The massive human ships moved into position, forming a perfect geometric pattern around the Void entity. Energy began to flow between them, not the darkness of the Void, but pure, blinding light. The Council defense platforms, now linked to the human network, added their power to the growing cascade of energy. "Now, Lieutenant," Sarah commanded. Execute final protocol. Daybreak. The energy reached a crescendo, and for a moment it seemed like a new sun had been born in space. The void entity screamed in frequencies that shouldn't have been possible, its darkness trying to flee from the light that surrounded it. But there was nowhere to go. The quantum anchors held it in place as the energy continued to build. Sarah's jaw tightened as she processed this new information. The whole situation had just become exponentially more complicated. The void wasn't just launching an attack, it was directly challenging humanity's gambit. And as she looked at the tactical display showing the massive fleet of corrupted precursor ships bearing down on her homeworld, she realized that all of humanity's careful plans and preparations might not be enough. Sarah's hands flew across the tactical console, initiating a sequence of commands that set the entire ship humming with power. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. Her voice echoed through the ship's comm system, steady and determined. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, the product of years of preparation for exactly this moment. The void ships will reach Earth in 48 hours, Parker reported, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Our fleet is moving to intercept, but the corrupted precursor vessels are using some kind of spatial distortion technology. Traditional weapons might not be enough. High Counselor Vex stepped forward, all pretense of diplomatic superiority forgotten. The Council fleet, they're not prepared for this. None of us are. But perhaps, the alien's skin rippled with changing colors as it made a decision. Perhaps we can offer something that might help. Sarah turned, her eyebrow raised questioningly. Vex reached into its robes and withdrew a small crystalline device. This contains the access codes to every Council defense platform and automated weapon system in this sector. We never shared this technology with emerging species, but the alien paused, looking at the approaching void ships on the display. But perhaps it's time we admitted that humanity has surpassed us in ways we never imagined. Without warning, the tactical display flashed with new alerts. The void ships had launched their first attack, targeting a small Council outpost. The footage showed something that made even the seasoned crew members gasp. The stations weren't just being destroyed, they were being absorbed, their matter and energy feeding the darkness that consumed them. Now? Sarah commanded, and Lieutenant Parker activated a sequence they had hoped they wouldn't need to use so soon. Throughout Council space, the hidden human fleet sprang into action, but they weren't attacking. Instead, each ship activated a device that sent ripples of golden energy through space itself. The Quantum Anchor Network, Sarah explained to their stunned alien guests. Those ruins on Mars didn't just warn us about the void. They showed us how to fight it. The ancient civilization failed because they tried to battle the darkness in normal space. We learned from their mistake. The tactical display showed the effects of the quantum anchors. Wherever their energy touched the void ships, reality itself seemed to solidify, preventing the creatures from slipping between dimensions. The corrupted precursor vessels found themselves forced to fight in normal space, where humanity's weapons could affect them. But the void wasn't finished. As they watched, the darkness between the enemy ships began to spiral and concentrate, forming into something that defied description. By all that exists, Zen whispered, it's trying to merge the corrupted ships into a single entity. Sarah smiled grimly. That's exactly what we wanted them to do. She pressed a final sequence of commands, and new ships appeared on the tactical display. Massive vessels unlike anything the aliens had seen before, emerging from hyperspace at precise coordinates around the forming void entity. The Lightbringer-class vessels, Sarah announced. Humanity's true masterpiece. We reversed the void's own technology. Instead of consuming energy and matter, these ships can channel the fundamental forces of the universe itself. She turned to the aliens. That's why we needed your defense platform codes. Not to control them, but to synchronize them with what's about to happen. The massive human ships moved into position, forming a perfect geometric pattern around the void entity. Energy began to flow between them, not the darkness of the void, but pure, blinding light. The Council defense platforms, now linked to the human network, added their power to the growing cascade of energy. Now, Lieutenant, Sarah commanded, execute final protocol. Daybreak. The energy reached a crescendo, and for a moment, it seemed like a new sun had been born in space. The void entity screamed in frequencies that shouldn't have been possible, its darkness trying to flee from the light that surrounded it. But there was nowhere to go. The quantum anchors held it in place as the energy continued to build. But just as victory seemed certain, the void did something unexpected. Instead of trying to escape, it began to pull the light into itself, attempting to corrupt the very weapon humanity had created to destroy it. The tactical displays went crazy, showing energy readings that broke every known scale. Sarah watched calmly, even as her crew tensed in anticipation. "That's it," she whispered. "Take it all in. Every last bit." Then she smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the void's corruption pause. "Lieutenant Parker, activate the final sequence. Show them why humanity was chosen to guard the light." The energy flow suddenly reversed, but what erupted from the human ships wasn't just light. It was pure creation itself, the fundamental force that had birthed the universe. The void entity, having greedily consumed the initial energy, found itself torn apart from within by the very power it had tried to corrupt. As the blinding light faded, the tactical display showed empty space where the void entity had been. The corrupted precursor ships drifted lifelessly, their dark energy gone. High Counselor Vex turned to Sarah, its skin cycling through colors of awe and disbelief. "You knew," the alien said softly. "You knew they would try to corrupt the light. This was your plan all along. It wasn't a question." Sarah nodded, her expression solemn. The ruins on Mars weren't just a warning. They were a test. The ancient civilization didn't fail. They sacrificed themselves to find a species that would approach the problem differently. One that would understand that sometimes the best way to defeat darkness isn't to fight it, but to let it destroy itself, the alien finished, finally understanding, by trying to corrupt something incorruptible. As the crew began damage assessment and recovery operations, Sarah looked out at the stars, now seeming somehow brighter than before. "Welcome to the real galaxy, Counselor," she said quietly. "I think it's time we had a serious discussion about humanity's role in it." The alien delegation looked at each other, then back at the tactical display showing the hundreds of human ships now visible throughout Council space. They finally understood. Humanity hadn't just advanced beyond their expectations. They had become the guardians of something far more important than mere technological superiority. They had become the protectors of light itself. In the days that followed, the galaxy underwent a transformation more profound than any in recorded history. The Galactic Council chambers, once filled with debates about emerging species and technological hierarchies, now buzzed with discussions of a new era of cooperation. Humanity's role had shifted from supposed newcomers to teachers, sharing their unique approach to science and warfare with species who had thought themselves far more advanced. Sarah stood at the observation deck of the Intrepid, watching as teams of human and alien engineers worked together to adapt the quantum anchor technology for use across Council space. The sight of former rivals working side by side brought a smile to her face. High Counselor Vex approached, its movements now relaxed and natural, no longer carrying the weight of assumed superiority. "The Council has officially recognized Earth as a founding member of the new Galactic Defense Initiative," Vex announced, coming to stand beside her. "Though I suspect that was your plan all along, to unite us not through force or diplomacy, but through necessity and mutual survival." Sarah nodded, watching as a group of engineers successfully activated a new quantum anchor platform. Humanity learned long ago that true strength doesn't come from standing alone. Those ruins on Mars taught us more than just technology. They showed us that even the most advanced civilization can fall if they try to face the darkness in isolation. Lieutenant Parker's voice came over the comm system. "Commander, the deep space probes are reporting no signs of void activity in any monitored sector. The quantum anchor network is fully operational. We did it." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "No, David," Sarah corrected gently. "We all did it.